Hi guys, hope you're having a good day and hope that tonight's or today's, whatever time of day this is going to be helpful for you as you're learning about the crisis and trauma issues that we can help so many people with. I'm going to talk today about some guidelines for dealing with a client who's dealing with PTSD. Now, as you know, PTSD is probably around 30 years old now, maybe 40. Back in the day, we called it in World War I and II things like combat fatigue and battle fatigue. Nobody really understood it, but they just found out that probably the demographic that's the most easily studyable because of the mass amounts of people you have as soldiers, as well as the mass amounts of people you have also that they're controllable environment because they're under authority. So they began to study this, and they just thought, well, you get fatigued by battle, you get fatigued by combat. But maybe they're drinking too much, maybe the divorce rate's higher. People didn't really understand it. It wasn't until Vietnam, and then it really kind of peaked to the level that we learned about now. It peaked at probably the Desert Storm years in the Middle East when we really started studying this. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and found out it's much more than being fatigued. It's an actual serious psychological syndrome, and it's no longer limited, of course, to the military. It's many people have it, many more than we ever thought could have it. And you can go a long ways in your practice and your work to helping people with PTSD. You never have to think, well, the goal here is to cope with trauma. You can resolve what trauma causes. I just want to talk a little bit about it and give you some of the things that I've found out that are important. First, let's talk about it from a neurological standpoint. When there's trauma, be it sexual abuse or emotional abuse or spiritual abuse or gaslighting or physical abuse, or there's trauma that's not coming from abuse. You know, someone can just be in a traffic accident and get PTSD, or have some disease or some abrupt thing happen, or maybe have somebody in their life die. Remember, trauma is not always abuse. Abuse can lead to trauma, but trauma is much broader than abuse. Trauma is the effect that comes from many things. And what it is on a neurological level, it's a matter of the amygdala. As we know, the amygdala is the small part back here in the bottom part of the head, is little. It's the fight or flight or freeze or fold part of the brain that doesn't think about a future. It doesn't think about rationality. It doesn't think about logic. It's having an experience, highly emotional. That amygdala, when you have a negative issue, I don't know, your waiter doesn't bring the right food, or you're late to a meeting, well, it feels it, you feel disappointed or mad or sad, and then it kind of processes on and goes into your memory banks, and you just kind of make decisions. That's not the case with trauma, PTSD, is that the amygdala becomes overwhelmed because the amount of data that the neural pathways are delivering to it are so overwhelming and so intense. The amygdala doesn't have the capacity to deal with it, and that's causes the traffic jam, and the amygdala can't just process it out into the memory banks. As you know, it either goes to the memory banks or where, you know, okay, now I remember that event, and also the learning center. Okay, I've learned from that, I can be a wise person, I can make decisions better. The neural pathways have a traffic jam, so it stays in the amygdala. So the amygdala stays in this frozen, overwhelmed state, and that things don't go to the prefrontal cortex. That's the key, and that's where you have symptoms like frozenness, depression, anxiety, recurring even hallucinations, but recurring flashbacks, irritability, substance problems, relational problems, just awful stuff because the person's brain isn't working right to make the right kind of decisions. So here's some things to think about, just on a treatment level. First off, you need to determine the severity of it, of course, because very severe PTSD might require hospitalization. Most of them don't, but how severe is it? In other words, is their life functioning or is their life not functioning? Because if it's functioning and they're disrupted, that's one thing. You can deal with that in outpatient therapy. If they can't even work, parent, get out of the bed, function, well, that's a whole different thing. They might need something more intense or more sessions per week or extra groups and this sort of thing. After severity, though, determine if it's pure PTSD, unrelated to characterological issues, or it's mixed with characterological issues, which are then maintaining the PTSD. Let me say that again. Is this pure PTSD, which, as you've seen, it's not really affecting the ability to attach, to be separate, to be integrated, to be an adult? Or is it deeply affecting those things and the characterological stuff's getting mixed up in there and it maintains the trauma? For example, somebody who has an overactive judge, right, in the integration piece, stage 3. The trauma might be telling them, well, it's your fault and you bring these bad things on yourself. Well, then they'll think that, feed that back to the PTSD, and all of a sudden they're blaming themselves and having even more flashbacks. So is it pure or is it related to their character issues? Very helpful to you diagnostically. And also assess ego strength. Now, if their ego strength is sound, and they're fairly resilient, or let's say appropriately resilient, then you can use attunement and gradually returning to the experiences to help them feel them with you, have a different response to them. If their ego strength is not sound, if they don't have a very resilient ego, you'll find out that they'll decompensate or they'll have a very strong reaction and not be able to function. Well, then you just continue with ego strengthening until they're strong enough. But just make sure this ego is strong enough to handle what you want to take them through. And then once they're strong enough, help them return to it and have a mismatching experience so that when they think about the abuse or the traffic accident or the loss or whatever, that then you're with them saying, you're not alone and it's horrible, but I'm there with you, I'm strengthening you. And all of a sudden they have that mismatching we talk about all the time where they think, okay, it's a memory now, but I'm not flashing back anymore. And this is, if it's pure PTSD, this is where things like cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, other modalities like these can be helpful. So you need to know these things. So there's a lot you can do about it. Anyway, that's kind of a summary of what PTSD is all about. Stay with the research. It's very exciting to see what people are doing, but it's an important issue. All right, have a good class.